we live in a society where we need to be perfect. For some reason, it's just embedded in because we feel like maybe if we are perfect, we'll get that love, that unconditional love that I think we all need.
Yes.
But it's really hard to get.
Yes.
And so when I'm thinking about like how it is we navigate inauthentic spaces or spaces that are more blurry or challenging, and we're in like that hustle or whatever it is.
Right.
There's a secret where we actually have free will in all of this. And we don't really, I don't think we really have the appreciation for that.
Yeah.
And so like in all that chaos and uncertainty, in that striving to be perfect, we end up I feel like we get stuck in like automatic mode where we're going through the world and we're just we're taking the blows, we're reenacting the past without even knowing it.
Yeah.
And without that reflection, we're acting on these things constantly. And we're like afraid of our own free will.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a part of the struggle for authenticity, is like discovering, wait, I actually do have a choice in all of this.
Right.
And it's not necessarily easy, but the rewards are so bountiful.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Race Relations Podcast. I want to welcome our guest, James Innocent. Y'all have already heard me say this before, but he's a dear friend. I've had so many dear friends on this podcast, and I'm so fortunate to be able to have another one. James is currently in the master's program at Seattle University in psychology that I went to for my master's, training to be a therapist, to be a community wisdom. You are an intern at Pacific Lutheran University doing some community work with the young people, and you're also an intern at the Dads organization, which is really cool. I just want to welcome you first to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, man.
It's good to be here.
Absolutely, man. It's good to have you. I know we've been talking about this for a long time.
Right, yeah.
And I'm just excited to get into this episode. But first, I wanted to take a minute. Y'all see the set. Y'all see what is live in here, okay? It's live in here. And I just wanted to take a second and say thank you to the Dads organization for hosting this podcast, this episode. And you work with them. So I just wanted to get a little bit about the Dads organization, what they do, so that people can know about it and get connected if they need it. So yeah, what is the Dads organization?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And just really happy to be here and to talk with a good friend. And yeah, so basically, I feel like we could do a whole podcast on what Dads is. And in that regard, like plug to what in terms of the organization, Marvin Charles and Jeanette Charles, they founded it 25 years ago. Okay. And in terms of like the actual whole story, I encourage people to check them out on Voice America. They have started a podcast, and they're I think they're on their like 6th episode.
That's
amazing.
The
time of this recording. So, and Marvin goes a lot into the story. Same with Jeanette. That being said, to honor that and, what's on the wall, Divine Alternatives for Dads Services.
Right.
So DADS is an acronym. And basically, Marvin and Jeanette just had this wild journey of getting their kids back from CPS. And there was a point at which, in that process, Marvin was told by someone, that he was kind of trapped in his cycle of anger, and that the judge, what he's looking for is for you to present a certain way. And when you do this, when you react to the system, then you fall victim to it. And he never knew that. Right. And it kind of set them, Marvin and Jeanette, on this journey, and they were able to get their kids back. And then just wild how they were able to just transition into something where it was really sustainable. But when they made it out of that, they decided that they wanted to help others too. And so to use their own testimonies as a way to help fathers all around the country, but especially in Seattle. So they've helped over 4,000 fathers reconnect with their children. Wow. And, whether it's navigating parenting plans, reconciliation with their partners, figuring out how to be a dad. They've done it all, and they've seen almost everything. And so, I just really respect what they do.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. That's really beautiful. And again, just want to say thank you to them. For everybody that's watching or listening, go out to the Dads website. Check it out. Again, if you need any resources or you just want some community wisdom, tap into the podcast, be a part of the network. Marvin, the CEO, is such a wise person. I've just met him one time, but I am so excited to dig in and actually meet him and connect with him more, to see what he's all about, because he is truly wise. So thank you for that introduction, man. And let's get to the topic at hand.
All right.
The topic at hand. So you came to me, 2 months ago, and said you wanted to have a conversation. There was a project that you're doing at PLU, and tell me a little bit about that so that people know what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you asked. I feel like authenticity is like the word, right? And it's something that I have been wrestling with, kind of coming into my own as a therapist, and what I wanted to bring, and my own past and who I am, being multiracial and having, a father from Haiti, and on my black side, and then on my white side, my mother from the United States. And as I was working in the field and learning, what it means to be a therapist, I'm still figuring that out, right?
It's ever going.
I was just really fascinated by this idea of authenticity. And a part of this program at PLU is working with a leadership symposium. And so there's an Act 6 scholarship program that it helps a full scholarship for students in the local area. Okay. And one of the themes that we had been wrestling with is this idea of belonging and what it means to belong, and this feeling of not belonging, and being in spaces that might feel inauthentic. And so I really wanted to, for the project, I wanted to do a project as a part of the whole experience at the internship. And I wanted it to be like, I had to do something that was like, that really embodied something I wanted to do, and that it was authenticity. And so I did a workshop actually with the students. And I came out of that thinking, wow, I feel like we're only getting started with this. And I really want to wrestle with the challenges here. And we definitely did do that. But I feel like doing it in this kind of format where we have, I'm about to be a professional, but, two professionals like talking about,
no, for real,
what it means would be really valuable. So that's the project. It's just figuring out authenticity. What does it mean to wrestle with that?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really love that. And I think it's such an important topic to have, conversation about, because one, we don't really even know what authenticity is, right? As a society, as a people, it's something that's really hard to define. And how do you get to that place of authenticity is the other question, right? And particularly when it comes to this show too, like, as you described, being, biracial, being also just presenting as Black, right? It's very difficult to find that authentic space in a society that is very oppositional to your existence, right? And so I'm really just looking forward to kind of digging into this dialogue and talking about authenticity, and hopefully being able to drop a little knowledge on it and how people can kind of get into the mind frame of authenticity and what it is. So I guess the first thing that I would want to know from you is, and I can share a little bit about my definition of it too, but how do you define authenticity? What does that mean to you?
Oh, right. Easy, right?
Right.
I feel like a disclaimer is necessary here, in that I might be working as, in the capacity of a therapist in the healing process, but I see the process and what I'm doing is very a dialogical thing. It's a dialogue. Right. And I just feel like I don't own any of my ideas of what it is. It's always changing and adapting. And so no matter what I say, because I have no idea what I'm going to say in this definition of authenticity, it can change. And I accept that. And I think, I just want to say that for everybody, it's going to look different. I think the idea of like what people think authenticity means is transparency. It's like this idea of like, I'm this, therefore this. Right. Cause effect. Right. And they're like, well, I can't do this in this space, and therefore I'm not being authentic. And I wouldn't say that that's not authenticity from my perspective, but I think that's a very superficial surface. Right. I really resonated a lot as a philosophy student on the way that Heidegger explored authenticity,
right?
And this idea that we're kind of thrown into the world with all of these predetermined qualities, like I'm thinking intersectional identities, economic status, all of it. And we're kind of left to navigate uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I feel like authenticity is when we're able to accept that uncertainty and move through it in a way where it's not about being like necessarily at peace, but accepting the discord, accepting the disturbance. And so that's kind of what I think of with authenticity. That's how I would define it.
No, I like that. I think that that's really rich. And there's a certain vulnerability that you're talking about when you're kind of being thrust into the world, right? With all the intersectionality that you're talking about, all the different social labels that you're talking about. And that holds a certain weight to try to navigate all those different things, right? In a way that speaks to the deep knowledge. So when I think about authenticity, the definition that comes to me is Gabor Mate's definition, right? So he's a MD. He studied trauma, addiction for a long time. He just released the book, The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture, which is such an amazing book. Everybody, y'all go buy it because it's amazing. But within this book, he talks about authenticity, and he says that authenticity is a deep knowing of oneself, a trust in oneself that develops kind of in the gut. Right. It's that trusting the intuitions of the gut feelings that come up for us as we're kind of navigating life. Right. And why I really thought that this conversation was important is because there are so many times in our life, and even for my clients that I work with, honestly, even today, the clients that I work with on today, where trusting our own authentic experience becomes very difficult.
Right.
Right. And oftentimes, you can trace this back to kind of the developmental origins of authenticity, right? So Gabor talks about how there's, you're brought into the world through an attachment, right? When you are born, if you think about it, every need that you have and every expression that you have is based on a reflection of someone else, right? It's very much an external kind of process, right? So your authenticity is based on the people that are around you, right? So if you're sad about something, and unless someone validates that you're sad outside of yourself, it's not really going to be that. You may feel that, but is it going to be validated, right? If you're angry, same thing, right? If you're feeling a lot of different emotions, but it's a very external type of situation. And as you move through development, it becomes, so that stage lasts, the external stage lasts from like 0 to 5. Right. The next stage lasts from 5 to about 12, where your kids get really selfish, and that's natural. Most parents get pissed about it, but it's natural, right? Because they're trying to formulate, how is it that I live in the world, right? And then you get into the stage where you're talking about with your students, where it's like 12 kind of into the 30s and 40s. It's very much trying to navigate, my sense of self and balancing external versus internal. And it becomes the social battle and the self battle.
Yeah, well, you could tell I wanted to jump in on that. One of the supervisors, my supervisor at PLU, Dr. Tom, great guy and someone that I look up to in a lot of ways. He often says we go from parent esteem to self-esteem.
Yes.
Especially coming from college, coming from home to college, and that dislocation, it creates a reorientation of like, what is mine and what is theirs? Right. And there's some stuff that, those are values that we want to keep. Right. And there's some things that we might want to change and adjust.
Right. Yeah. Like, and I think that like the biggest thing there is like, the reality is that's why authenticity is so hard to pinpoint oftentimes, is because if you don't have an environment that allows you to plant the seeds of your reality being real to you, you will not be able to pinpoint your authenticity very well.
Right. Yeah. You don't have the data to be able to determine what it is. And so it's like, who am I?
Right. Right. And so what we often see, and what I see, it's so much of what I see. And honestly, I want to talk to Marvin about this because it's so real, is what often happens is parents, especially now with this digital age and also where capitalism comes into play so much, where there's just so much economic strife. And so especially for BIPOC parents, where there usually is not the kind of economic resources where there's one parent at home and, there's one parent in the field. Is usually, both parents are out hustling, or there's a single parent type situation. The kid often is not getting the attention that they need to be able to let them reflect that authenticity or feel kind of acknowledged in their authenticity.
In that external way that you're talking about. Yeah.
Right. There's a major segregation between the parent acknowledging that child's existence and their emotions, right? And then the child from that being nourished in their own ability to trust their own gut feeling, right? And so that causes that divide as they start to age, because they never, from the very beginning of their development, trusted their authentic experience because their parents weren't able to reflect that authenticity to them.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And it creates an environment where, in a system that doesn't really tell us, including the parent system, but I would also say wider society and community, that doesn't really tell us or guide us on how to navigate our emotions,
right,
and emotional regulation and what that looks like.
Right.
Speaking of Gabor Mate, big fan as well.
Yeah.
In one of his videos, he talks about how when a child gets angry, sometimes the first reaction is like, go to your room and be mad there.
Right.
Versus exploring that anger and giving them the permission to understand what that what that emotion is and what that means.
Right.
And it sounds so, I think even like 3 years ago, I wouldn't have been receptive to that. Like this idea that feelings actually carry their own weight. I valued logic so much more than that.
Right.
But the power of being able to play that emotion through, I actually heard you say that. That's the first place I heard this. And it's become somewhat of a core tenet of my own practice.
Yeah.
We were in class and you were visiting our classroom, and you said that when something happens that's really intense, you try and let that emotion play through. And I still believe this, that we need to help those emotions play themselves through. And that's what parents serve at that point as well. That's what community can serve, social support. But when they don't, I feel like they become sedimented and regimented into the past.
Yes.
And it becomes stuck there, and we can ignore it or whatever, but it's still controlling or really modifying our experience.
Right. Right. No, absolutely. And I think that oftentimes in our society, because we don't value, like you said, that emotional kind of investment, right? We don't value emotions as a society and how we feel. We, again, don't get to develop the sense of authenticity that is needed to help us navigate the challenges in life. And what you often see because of that is a lot of depression, right? You see a lot of anxiety. So you're depressed because you're suppressing those feelings, right? And as I said to you, like Gabor defines that, depress, right? Which is to push down. You're literally suppressing your sense of navigating the world. Does this make me feel angry? Does this make me feel sad? Does this make me feel happy? Does this make me feel frustrated? Right? If no one's acknowledging that to you in a space, you're gonna get lost, and you're also gonna feel that your feelings don't matter.
Right.
Right.
So true. And I guess I don't want to knock positive psychology or positivism, but I do think that we are oriented in a way where we feel like there's only certain emotions that are valid.
100%.
Like being happy or calm, for example. And I was talking about this in like my supervision group actually very recently. So it's very fresh in my mind. But when we think about like mindfulness and meditation and emotion, we think like, oh, I'm upset. Like I'm not doing it right. And it's like, no, you are.
Right.
That's the magic, is playing through and accepting yourself. Yeah. Through those negative emotions, just as much as you are the positive ones.
Right. I think that comes from even the language that we use, right? Because we have to look at the social structure. We have to look at how we're kind of set in relationship with one another, right? So one of the things for me in my research on empathy is looking at how we're often set up as defensive beings, right? And so for everyone listening, like on a prehistoric level, when we were hunters and gatherers, we had adrenaline, we had cortisol to be able to physically help us stay safe, right? From the hyenas, from the lions, from the tigers, right? All that stuff in the nature trying to kind of kill us or threaten our existence, right? But throughout time, as we built a more individualistic society, especially in America, right, where we're now leveraging each other's differences on each other, right, and we still have that biological system in place. Well, guess what gets set in motion when you look different than I do, or you express anger different than I do, or you communicate differently than I do, or you come from, you have a different reaction to a situation that I didn't think was that big of a deal, but you did, right? Because of the background that you came from, right? And so now, like I said, you're now a threat to me, right? And so when we look at emotions and we look at how we try to kind of stray away from certain ones and push into certain ones, it's very much a dance between the critique that comes on the other side of the conflict. If I accept your anger, I have to accept that I'm probably implicated in your anger in some way.
Definitely.
Right? Like I probably either caused it or I have a solution to be able to help you. Right? But my defenses don't want to accept the critique that comes if I push into the anger that's there. Right? My sense of self, my ego, right, which is the subjective self, the view of myself, has to be held culpable for that. Right? Yeah. And so we don't value things that put us at risk, such as those, but those are the things that really allow us to navigate relationships.
Surrender.
Surrender. Exactly. Like vulnerability is the thing that comes to my mind. Gabor defined this again. Honestly, Gabor, if you want to come on the show, just to let you know, we'd love to have you.
You got to make sure to invite me too.
Oh man, you'll be here, bro. You'll be here. But he defines vulnerability, and honestly, it's actually the root of vulnerability means to be wounded, right? Mm-hmm. So to think about that, when you're being vulnerable with your kids, when you're being vulnerable with your friends, when you're being vulnerable with your partner or your family, whatever it is, your coworkers, are you showing up in a way to be able to be wounded, right?
It's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
100%. Give me more of that.
Well, like you said, we're designed to protect ourselves. Right. And so this idea that we're available for being wounded, it's counterintuitive to what you would think. You think, especially when you're trying to take this role of authority and protection for the family, if you're considered sort of the person who's causing the problem, right? Immediately, it's like, well, I'm not doing my job then I'm immediately a bad parent. Yes. When in reality, it's that in that surrender and that vulnerability of defense, that you're able to move into something so much deeper and so much more profound, which is the sadness that's happening outside of you. And you're allowing yourself to engage in something that's authentic and so much more than that. But our body is designed in a way, like you said, from an evolutionary perspective, to protect ourselves. And so it's not just, I think, counterintuitive logically. Part of it is a biological sort of measure. And so I think there's something to be said about hacking that synthetic, the parasympathetic system with the synthetic system, and like, I hope I said that right.
No, you're good. It's all good.
But this idea that like we have that adrenaline and that cortisol and we're activating, we're ready to kill a lion, but we have a kid in front of us, or we have a friend, or we have a partner, and allowing that part to play through and accepting it and seeing like, I'm really activated. And sometimes that could be stepping away. It's like, I love you. Could you just give me like 10 minutes? Right. And I'm going to go reset. I'm going to feel this. And then when you come back, the defenses are gone, and you can now make space. Right. And I think that's what I hear, making space thrown around a lot, but it's an important concept. But so you can make space for someone else's experience.
Right. Right. I mean, that's that empathy bit, right?
Right.
And like, I don't want to nerd out on that because that's my thing. But like, in my model that I'm developing, we talk about I talk about how you can't empathize with someone until you empathize with yourself. Right? Can't
Can
empathize.
we just call that Can we just call that authenticity,
right?
Point blank? Yeah.
That's just real. Like,
Yeah.
you can't empathize with someone until you empathize with yourself, meaning that you need to acknowledge that you are a defensive being, right? And inside of that, as you're saying, kind of go to that introspective place and question, why am I showing up defensively in the way that I am, right? I see so many parents that, have kids that I'm working with, right? And the parents are coming from their own trauma background, right? Where they're fearful of the way that, that they've been treated in the community because they're Black, and they're fearful for their kids, right? And so they constitute a certain type of environment for their kids, trying to keep them safe. But the reality is that they're acting in their own anxiety, right?
And they're perpetuating it, intergenerational trauma.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so if you were able to take a second to separate yourself, like you're saying, first stop the actual biological stuff going on, right? So for me, that's breath, right? So I'll go and I'll breathe. You ever see me in the streets and I'm breathing, it's because I'm angry, right? So I always say you have to stop that first, right? Stop the cortisol, stop the adrenaline, realize that it's not that the person is not a threat in front of you. It's not a lion, like you said, right? But then start to go to this introspective place of like, okay, I am this egoic being, right? This sense of self being. And I have these different categories. I kind of put them out to, family and attachment, conflict management, trauma, and your historical responses, your social identity, and your personal and unique experiences and attributes.
Right. And just to like jump in to one of those, this idea of like trauma, and your responses, I think it's just ringing really loud for me right now. And it's this idea of, to me, hearing it without you even describing it, is, I did read it a while ago. So maybe it's like some of that's just embedded in, my own way of thinking.
I love it
now, but it as in your model.
Yeah.
But like, if you're reacting to something and you have a trigger and you have a trauma response, that's the empathy towards oneself.
Yes.
That is like, that's the available discovery work.
Right.
Because then you can still have that response.
Right.
But you're able to have that self-awareness to actually determine, you don't have maybe a choice in how your amygdala responds and it's pumping all of that out. You might not be able to control that always. But you can control you can control your actions to some extent.
100%.
You can control how you move through those feelings. And so by being able to have that self-awareness, you're directly impacting the relationship with someone else.
Yes.
And you are allowing yourself to be empathetic.
Right.
Even though you're having that trauma response.
Right. Right. Yeah. Like you're allowing yourself to show up authentically, right, in your reactions and what you've been through. But you're also allowing space for, again, the other person to show up authentically in what they're experiencing. Right. But you can't do it if you cut out yourself first, right? Because you're not going to have the bandwidth to be able to actually take whatever they're going to show up with, right?
That's spot on.
Right. And a lot of people don't recognize that or don't even recognize that they're destabilized, is the word that I use when we kind of come to that egoic defensive place when they're in conflict, right? When someone's trying to bring them a bit of their authenticity that has maybe a little bit of spiciness to it, let's just call it, right? And so we need to do the diligent work of self-inquiry, mindfulness, right? Where did this come from? Right? Grow deeper in your sense of self-knowledge, right? To then be able to externally go and say, well, what is this, right? And again, like you said, it's not about necessarily stopping the trauma response, right? Because depending on how the more introspective you are, it's going to heal itself anyway over time, right? You still may have kind of inklings of it, but it will, as Gabor says, like it'll start to scar over. You'll have that kind of restricted movement, but it's not going to be as triggerable, right? If it's, not an open wound, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just really important.
Sorry, I just like...
No, go ahead.
I'm really loving this riffing we're doing. And like one of the things that I'm just going back to that thought of like in the definition when I said that it's not necessarily just transparency. I would say transparency like with an asterisk.
Right.
It's not just you're having a response and so you're playing it through and it's like you should have held that. Right. But instead it's this idea where you're able to do that work and understanding.
Yes.
So that there is this transparency where you can be like, I'm having a response right now.
Yes.
I think there's a little bit of fear. I think there's some anger.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling really triggered. And I know that it's not just you.
Yes.
And that's a different kind of transparency than just acting on all those emotions.
Yeah.
It's celebrating those emotions in a way where it's like, this is something that's happening to me, and that's real.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's your fault or anything like that, we don't have to even get into that right now in this moment. This is what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And that's why I would, add the asterisk to the transparency piece.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that that's so real too. I mean, for myself in my relationships, there's so many different times where, if it's a family member, a friend, or, my partner, which it probably comes on my partner most because she's around me the most. But there's times when I'm like, I'll get upset and I'll have a reaction and I'll say, okay, I'm going to slow down and I'm going to look at where this came from. Right. And I externalize the kind of threat that I think is before me. Right. So the person that's in front of me is not really even the problem. Right. It's something that happened years ago, or it's something that, happened last week that is really triggering me, or it's the fact that I haven't slept. Right. Or, you know what I mean? Like it's those things. And so when you do that, what you do is you start to work through the trauma that you've been through because you start to externalize it. And the person that's in front of you, right, and I'm speaking to parents when I say this, doesn't become the trauma.
Right.
Your kids don't become your trauma, right? Your kids aren't the reason that you're not doing X, Y, and Z. Your kids aren't the reason that you're not going out and living life and doing the things that you should be, right? Or if you're in a relationship, right? You aren't the problem if you're in an abusive relationship, right? It's the fact that the person that you're with isn't adherent to what you're talking about, right?
Yes. I love this. I wrote some notes here, and I feel like it fits some of that.
Yeah, no.
And it's, I just feel like we live in a society where we need to be perfect. For some reason, it's just embedded in because we feel like maybe if we are perfect, we'll get that love, that unconditional love that I think we all need.
Yes.
But it's really hard to get.
Yes.
And so when I'm thinking about like how it is we navigate inauthentic spaces or spaces that are more blurry or challenging, and we're in like that hustle or whatever it is. Right. There's this secret where we actually have free will in all of this. And we don't really, I don't think we really have the appreciation for that. Yeah. And so like in all that chaos and uncertainty, in that striving to be perfect, we end up I feel like we get stuck in like automatic mode where we're going through the world and we're just we're taking the blows, we're reenacting the past without even knowing it. Yeah. And without that reflection, we're acting on these things constantly, and we're like afraid of our own free will. Yeah. And I feel like that's a part of the struggle for authenticity, is like discovering, wait, I actually do have a choice in all of this. Right. And it's not necessarily easy, but the rewards are so bountiful.
Right. Right. And I think that the challenge is, again, going back to the fact that society and dependent upon how we were raised has a lot to do with how much choice we actually truly perceive us having. Yes. Right. Because if I'm raised in an environment, again, where I don't feel validated, people aren't listening to me when I'm upset, when I'm happy, right? They're not listening to me when I'm frustrated, right? Or society sees me as an issue all my life, which is what it is for us being Black men, right? It becomes a lot harder to see that we have a choice in navigating the difficulties and the suffering that we're going through, right? That we can actually say, well, no, wait, stop. I actually have a choice in everything that I'm going through to a certain degree, at least in cultivating relationships and cultivating safe spaces, to be able to restore my sense of self, right? It gets distorted. It's like, I mean, like you said before we started, right? And it's like in my empathy model too, is like it becomes the Matrix type situation.
Yes, I was just thinking that.
Right? And go ahead, you can describe it.
Oh, I mean, I have a problem. I like the Matrix too much.
It's real.
Once a year.
It's real.
And I just think of the moment where Neo is just sitting down on that couch. Yeah. And he has like a glass of water next to him, and then Morpheus sits down and he presents him with an option. He has a choice. He has the red pill, the blue pill. It's such a beautiful scene. Right. But there's this idea of liberation and figuring out that you have a choice through that. There's this sense of understanding that you can get in realizing that all of these constructs that are designed to get you to be a part of the system.
Right.
When you realize you don't have to play that role, there's a power in that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what true liberation is. It's decolonizing all of those learned behaviors, learned expectations of what your future could look like. And there's something scary about that, because once you open up possibility, it begs the question of who am I?
Yep.
You know, there's something about adhering, and Sartre talks about this too, this idea of like bad
Another
faith.
philosopher that for those that listen.
Jean-Paul Sartre, you know, and you know, this idea of bad faith and holding on to this idea of like, no, this is me. Like, I'm a therapist.
Yes. Right.
I'm an authority. I'm a parent. I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
And this idea of like being this perfect thing versus I perform therapy and I hope it works. And sometimes, you know, like it might not be as good as it could be.
Right.
And it's more of a verb. And this idea of like accepting the uncertainty of that and also the possibility.
Yes. No, I think that, again, you bring up a really good point. We often get fixated with our existence, right? It becomes a very kind of isolating thing. We just go through the motions, right? We think that, you know, like for me, when I was a kid or when I was maybe in my young 20s, I thought that I needed to be this black kid that was an athlete, you know, was at the gym every day. But for other people, not myself, I had to go buy all the expensive shoes. I needed all the watches. I needed to go on vacation. I needed to do all that stuff, right? Because that was the projection of what society often feeds me, right? And what is permissible when it comes to like the hip hop or the rap that's out there that's really owned by like the white companies that, you know, only give you a certain avenue of music that you can make, right? Because it's very intentional, the programming that's out there, right? And I thought that that was my only existence, right? And when I had mentioned my, you know, the relationship I had earlier before, when that relationship ended, it was actually right before I was going to go into my master's degree, like the month before. Reality hit me. I realized that I did have a choice in the things that I was doing, right? And it was hard. It was the hardest hit that I've ever taken before in my life. It was a gut punch.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It's a tough pill to swallow, right? Like Neo comes out and he's just like, you know, absolutely suffocating in an air that he didn't breathe before, but was around him. It was actually present, but he didn't know that it was there, right? He sees the environment and it's overstimulating, right? Because it's so barren and just like desolate, right? And I think that oftentimes when we get near authenticity and it's presented to us, that's the thing that kicks in again, that defensive system where it's like, I've been programmed my whole life to be like this, right? To be the basketball star, to be the psychologist, to be this, to be that. And like you're saying, language is very important, right? If you're told that you are something, and if you're labeling yourself as something, when that time comes, that shift happens, you're going to get destabilized.
Right. Where you realize where you're called, where the mirror comes up and you're not that perfect version of whatever that label is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or you're even offered another opportunity that makes you maybe have to pivot a little bit, but you're like, nah, I'm a basketball player. Right. You know what I mean? That's all I am. Right. But it's like, no, like you also love family. You love to be able to like go out and, you know, do walks in the park, or, you know what I'm saying? Like there's a dynamic that we need to actually look at and appreciate. So you can't get stuck in that pattern, but we often do the minute that we go outside of it. And this is, I think, for the PLU students that you're talking about, right? As you go out into life, realize that there are a lot of scripts that you have, right? Realize that the reality of the situations in front of you that have been placed upon your shoulders, you don't have to be, right? And understand that, yes, when you step outside of it, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be painful. But again, that's that vulnerability piece. Right. The ability to be wounded.
And they're still them at the end of the day.
Yeah.
They are still from where they came from. They are still embody. They just have more of a choice of what that means for them.
Right.
Totally. Yeah.
No, 100%, 100%. And I think that the reality is, and again, this is because of the video that you had shown. So For the people listening, James had showed me a video of a woman talking about being authentic at work, and she was a black woman.
Yes.
Right. And she was kind of making the case, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that it's almost impossible to be able to do it, right, at specific times, right? And I kind of threw the critique of like, yes, it is, but it's not that person's problem necessarily to fix. They have agency to fix it. They have choice to be able to fix what they can, but it's also the fact that we don't value deep knowledge of other people, right? So as a company, we may say, be authentic, come, how you are at work, but are we really actually investing the time to get to know people? Are we actually building that sense of community that's needed to be able to nourish a deeper sense of self for other people to know how other people show up, right? Because the reality is we're throwing a ton of personalities into a pot and experiences and perspectives into a pot, but we never actually take time to say, ooh, well, that one, that one's purple, or that one's pink, or, you know what I'm saying? Like actually like, oh, but there's also a little bit of yellow in it. And like, we don't do that deep introspective work there.
Right.
We're more for productivity, that if you're authentic and that breeds productivity, then we'll praise you for it. Right. But that's really also very poisonous to a lot of people. And if you look at a lot of this is again, I've mentioned it in Gabor a lot, but this was in his book. He was talking about the CEO of IKEA, and he was talking about how the CEO of IKEA was in the limelight for a long time. He was loving it in terms of just the money aspect, right? Like he was getting all the praise and the accolades, but he was suffering, just suffering, like just absolutely strife of any intent, like internal resources of like love and happiness, of joy, right? Because he was just turned into a product, right? He had a quota. No one knew him. No one knew what comprised of what was really valuable to him, and he didn't even know it because he had been in the system so long he couldn't recognize it. Yeah. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts based on what you're saying, but yeah, just like setting back and towards like this TED Talk, and we can maybe like post it somewhere or something like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'll post the link.
But she also has an article that is it's an HBR Harvard Business Review article on stop telling women they have imposter syndrome.
Right.
And a part of the main point of that article is that we say so much, we almost diagnose it in a way where it's like you have a problem because you feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And that's really where she's trying to tackle it. And in that TED Talk, she to your point, like you were saying, she was talking about how people of color, like how should they navigate inauthentic spaces? And she's like, well, it's not our problem. Y'all got to figure it out. And it does beg this question of like, yeah, well, what kind of autonomy do people of color have though, like in that? Right. Because I still got to exist.
No, 100%.
I still got to figure out what's mine and like what I want to get out of it. And honestly, when I think about it, I don't have a clear answer because it's something I have to do every day.
Yes.
And I feel differently every single time. But I will say that a lot of what we were talking about understanding what's ours and what's outside of that is such a big piece.
Right.
I'll also say that there's something about having like building a community and allowing yourself to really process like that was weird for you too, right?
Yeah.
And being able to have that, you were that for me when I was going through the master's program.
Yeah.
And, like being as a person of color, like in predominantly white systems, like it's challenging. And like I do have like a lot of trauma that I carry from that. And I think it's important for me to name it at the very least for myself. But in that community that is able to be developed, I'm able to function in those spaces that might not be as I like to think of as trauma informed. And I define that as like there's a little bit more, there's less of a hierarchy. So the power structures are different.
Right.
I think that's the biggest thing I'm keeping in mind when I say trauma informed.
Yeah.
And that's hard to get in systems.
Right.
So there's something about creating a sense of community and social support that can help one navigate that discomfort. And Dad's has done that for me too. Like, so they have, I'm agnostic, but they have a Bible study every Wednesday. And it has completely helped me work through a lot of my anger and a lot of my frustration and a lot of my trauma. And it's men from different walks of life, a lot of them fathers, most of them. And it's a different bunch sometimes every time, but there's a bit of a core group, and we talk about, usually it's like a core piece of, you were there.
Yeah.
This is for the audience.
Yeah, no, for sure. Give it to him.
But like a core piece of scripture. And I was really resistant at first, but by the end of it, I felt that sense of safety, and that I could share my feelings in a way where it wasn't, I knew nobody else would feel defensive about it.
Yeah.
So going back to this question of like, how do you navigate inauthentic spaces?
Yeah.
I'm still figuring that out, and that's why I'm happy we're talking about it. But I will say there's something to be said about having a community and having a social support system where you feel like you can process your emotions and they won't be penalized or punished.
Right. Yeah. No. And I think, like starting to move to that space of like, okay, how do you get there? Right.
Right.
I think, absolutely. Build a community, right? One that has the same values as you do, right? Values is very important when it comes to authenticity.
Right.
Right. Because if you don't know what your values are, or your values are different than someone else, they're not going to be able to kind of get on the same page as you as easily. Right. You're going to have to work a little bit harder. Right. And sometimes authenticity, it needs to be cuddled. It needs to be, kind of just wrapped up, embraced.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because you're not going to be perfect all the time. Right. And so for the people that are listening, if you want to get to that authentic space, you have to find and surround yourself with people that allow you to be imperfect, right? Without condemnation. And oftentimes that comes through having the same value system as you do. But it also can be not. But I think values are very key, right? You need to know what your values are. I think another thing too is understanding the situation, right? Right. Because like you said, there's times where I can be completely authentic, right? And there's times when I may be punished for showing up authentically in space, right? And this is the problem of the BIPOC person in America, right?
We're still in the matrix.
Still in the matrix.
We might have gotten out, but we still got to plug in.
Right, exactly. And oftentimes there's the agents that will spot us.
Right.
Right? You know what I'm saying? He coming through and he's going to say, ooh, or that person's going to say, ooh, like I acknowledge that you're not necessarily a part of the normal, right? You're an anomaly. Right. The system doesn't like anomalies. And so we have to be mindful of the spaces that we're in when it comes to trying to be authentic. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can't be in those spaces, right? But we also need to be very diligent that when we show up authentically, specifically, like if I show up in a white space, right, I have to go home and do a lot of restorative work,
right,
to be able to bear the weight that I took to be that. Right. I mean, even talking on this podcast, and I'm talking about white people and black people, there's a tension that is there because I know some white people that are listening might be like, ooh,
same part of my brain was going off.
Right.
Like, what can I say?
Exactly. Like, and it's damaging because again, I'm suppressing. My gut is saying, say something. And I'm trying to like actually listen to it and honor it. Right. And it's this process, right? We have to be gentle with ourselves, but also acknowledge, again, what energy we're putting out. You can't put out too much or you're going to burn yourself out, right? And so you have to cultivate those relationships with people that again, allow you to be vulnerable and are vulnerable in return and have some sense of community to be able to authentically be yourself.
Right. That's, it reminds me of spoon theory, and I know we
love the spoons, bro.
I love the spoons. I know. Yeah, it's such a simple idea, but it's so true. It's the idea is that, let's say you have any given amount of spoons in a day, and there's a limit to it, and so you have to kind of obtain spoons. But let's say I wake up with 0 spoons. I eat some breakfast. It's my favorite meal. I watch maybe The Matrix because I wake up real early.
Yep.
I got like 10 spoons.
Right.
And then I read the New York Times and like I read something. I'm like, ooh, I lose like 1 spoon. Yeah. And then I go to an inauthentic space. I lose like 10. And now I'm in the negatives. I need to be able, the idea is the spoons is being conscious of how much energy we have to be able to manage our authenticity, to be able to give those parts of ourselves and giving us time to, giving us a cue to reset.
Right.
And maybe that's through something like mindfulness,
right?
Like recognizing what's happening in us. And you were hinting at that before, like, so I think about spoon theory and navigating it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect way to break it down. It's a very tangible way to break it down, because we often don't look at our relationships, not to say it's a plus and a minus, but it is somewhat to a certain degree when it comes to authenticity, right? So how is it that I feel in space with someone, and specifically, how do I feel after I'm in space, right?
Yeah.
So there's the before, there's the current, and then there's the after.
Totally.
Right? And am I drained or am I energized, right? I know for you, I always feel energized afterwards. I'm like, I'm ready to go, right? Like I can keep going.
Right.
But there's other people in my life where I'm like, before I even get to this situation, right? I'm like, nah, I don't know. I'm going to be drained. I'm already drained thinking about it,
tax
right?
collectors getting those spoons.
Exactly. Like, so it's me saying, okay, like what am I ready to do? Right. What am I ready to put out? Right. Yes, there are some spaces that you do need to show up in that will take spoons from you. Right. But if you're mindful enough, you can understand and build a core community that you don't have to do that for. Right. And a lot of us don't realize that our core community can be that. Right. And so we surround ourselves with people that are inauthentic. It can be the abusive partner. It can be the inconsistent friend, or the, not thinking about your feelings. Right. And all that stuff. It can be the boss that's bothering you. Right. You know what I'm saying? Or it could be the family. I guess boss would be external, but family member that's not really paying attention to what you need. Right. Because authenticity is a need. Right. It's a innate need that we have. And I think that oftentimes, and again, Gabor talks about this in his book, where he talks about attachment and relation and authenticity, right? Where attachment is a biological need, right? So every baby that's born into the world, if it didn't have it's some sort of caretaker, it would die, right? It doesn't have the resources to be able to take care of itself. It
survival
needs,
skill,
right?
Or survival necessity,
right? It needs someone else, right? Babies are actually human babies are actually the most vulnerable baby of any of the animal kingdom, right? Because we literally need it. Some other babies can actually make their way out, but we need humans, right? Through this need stays with us as we age, right? And yes, humans, especially adults or kids, can be by themselves for a certain duration of time,
right? Yeah.
But we still need people, right? And specifically, we need people that allow us to be authentic, right? But because of the trauma, or because of society, or because of the attachment style that may be placed upon us, or because of the conflict management skills that we have, right? We often don't get that. Right. And so now, if we have to pick between attachment or authenticity, well, you're always going to pick attachment. You're always going to pick being with someone, right?
Yeah, that automatic self is always going to go towards connection.
Right. Absolutely. Regardless of what that connection is. It could be a crap connection, right? It could be horrible, right? That's how a lot of people end up in abusive relationships, is that you pick someone because you don't want to be alone.
And there's a short-term quality to it,
right?
That it's replenished. Like if you depending on how you replenish,
right?
It might give you the illusion of like a spoon, but it's made out of plastic.
Yeah. No, that's a very good distinguisher, right? So even like when you come to like abusive relationships, for example, right? Your partner may do something that makes you smile every once in a while, 1 in every 20, right? But that's a spoon. Right? Oh, it makes me feel seen. It makes me feel heard. But you didn't realize that you just minus 19 spoons.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like you're negative, right? So are we doing that work and realizing that our attachment, yes, it's pivotal. It's a need for us. But it doesn't mean that we need to leverage our sense of authenticity, our sense of honoring those gut feelings, honoring that sense of self, right? I think that is, once you can kind of lock into that and understand those two concepts, it sets you up to be in just a world of navigating in a place like you've never been before.
It's wealth.
Right.
It's wealth. It's it's its own sort of wealth, where you have one of those you have a passive income now
right
coming in, and when you do that, when you set up that passive income, you're able to go out into the world
right
and handle these really disruptive situations that and I also would like to say that there's something about having the intentionality to navigate that.
Yes.
Where you realize even when you're in, maybe like a really white space, and you know it's going to take some energy out of you, like you're carrying that with you,
right,
so that you know that you've had a choice.
Yes.
Versus when you're just stuck in that same routine, or
Right.
you're just feeling those things and you don't even know,
right,
because you're suppressing them.
right.
And so there is a power that you can get out of that.
Yeah. No, I think that you're spot on with that, because again, we often don't realize that there is choice in that. And so we don't feel empowered when we walk into a really difficult situation. We just feel deflated. We feel depressed. We feel anxious, right? I know for myself, when I have to, go through those tough situations, I applaud myself at the end, because I recognize that I had to go through it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like, oh, I'm giving myself some claps, some praises, you know what I'm saying? Some accolade, because I was like, oh, I endured that, right? I had a choice in that, right?
Right.
And I think that oftentimes, because of the scripts that are written for us in society, right, and again in our environment, we don't actually even perceive that, again, like you said earlier, that there is a choice and what that choice really means.
Right. Yeah, and it's one that we constantly have to do. It's not that you just take the pill once. No, because like if you're going to use the movie too much, I could talk about it for days. But there's a guy in the Matrix, and I'm spoiling the movie if you haven't watched it. I'm sorry, spoiler alert. But he wants to be replugged into the Matrix.
Yes,
so he took the pill, and he wanted to go back. He wanted to taste the
steak.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
Yeah. No, that's a really important scene. I don't think people really recognize. Like, he is talking to the agent, which has the ability to plug him in or keep him out, and that's the dialogue of yourself saying, I have choice, right? I recognize that I can actually push towards my authenticity, right? Or I can give into the overwhelming sense of attachment that I want to be a part of, right? Which comes with that sense of numbness, right? Or depression, right? And he says, I recognize that the steak is fake, right? It's going to be juicy though. It's fat. It's ready for me, right? He takes a bite and he's like, it's good. Let's stay here, right?
Right.
So I think, again, choice is so important, and you have to be intentional about it. So any last things that come up for you? Let me look in the notes really quick. I know we've almost been going for an hour. Let me see here.
I honestly feel really good about what we talked about.
Okay.
But if you want to talk about something, I mean, I didn't talk about the wise mind, and I wanted to do that, but frankly, I think I'm good.
Okay.
I think I'm feeling really good about what we talked about. I don't know how you're doing, but
I think so. It's been. Yeah. I hope y'all are enjoying it. Yeah. I think it's been fire.
Yeah.
For everyone, not just for the PLU students, but it is really important for young people to understand. Like, oftentimes you're not going to have, you will be in environments where authenticity is not encouraged, right? Don't listen to that noise, right? If you have a gut feeling, if you have an embodied feeling, tap into it, respect it, right? If you can't get out of that situation, there was a kid that came up in the conference that I told you I was presenting at last week, and he asked a really pivotal question. He asked the question of, because the presenter was talking about authenticity, and he asked the question, what do I do if my parents are the people that aren't allowing me to be authentic, right? And I see this all the time, and it's a really hard thing, because even there we feel like we don't have a choice, right? And so we suppress a lot of the stuff that we experience, and that puts us deeper into depression. I think we have to be able to understand that the beginning of healing is understanding that you at least can acknowledge and hold those gut feelings.
Right. That's so true.
Like, that is the the beginning of healing. You yourself can say, I'm feeling this way.
Writing it in a journal, finding a way to honor that, finding a way to piece it together.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Write it in a journal, listen to a song, or watch a movie, or, it sounds weird to say this, but like, just speak it out. Even if you got to speak it out to space.
Oh yeah. I've done that.
You know what I mean? Like that's
in my car. Yeah.
All the time, all the time. I'm upset. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't like this situation. You have to be grounded in your own value, right? Because if you let other people distinguish that value for you,
right,
which often happens because of the society that we live in, right? Because you're a kid and you're just beginning to develop your sense of self. And even as adults, right, we lose contact with our sense of value. Authenticity is value, right? Find it for yourself by at least starting to honor how you feel, right? And from there, know that you have a choice to surround yourself with people that value who you are, right? And also understand that relationships change, right? Especially when you're a kid, the friends that you have, they may be in your life for a chapter, right? But they may not be there for the whole story, right? And so just be mindful of people that can truly tap into your sense of value, right? If your gut is at peace with people telling you the way that you are certain times, hey, you're beautiful. Hey, you're an amazing person. You know what I mean? You're really intelligent, right? Or you could clean this up. You know what I'm saying? Like this could be different, right? If your gut is at peace with that, stick to those people, man.
And they're out there. They're not myths.
No.
There's I guess one thing, just hearing that, and thank you, that was spot on.
Thank you, man.
So as a part of the Bible study, we invite fathers that are going through the parenting classes and that are currently like going through the struggle of trying to get their kids back and navigating the system, and then also recognizing and working through their own stuff for the first time. But there was a moment where like basically we were talking to a father, and he felt really vulnerable, and we all really held that for him. And Marvin said to him, he's like, it's real easy to fall through the cracks when you don't have community. Yeah. And it was so real. And I talked to him after. I was like, what did you think about that? Like, that was just so real. And he's like, yeah, I agree with that now that I'm here. And he's like, but I will say there are some communities where I can't do that. Yeah. And my mind blew when he said that too, because there is something to be said about finding a space where unconditional love or something close to it can be there, and navigating and figuring out what that is and what that looks like. And for a lot of people, they're doing that for the first time. Yeah. And I think just practicing giving yourself grace through that struggle, it's just through, honoring it, recognizing it, like you're saying, it's just such a good, it's the essential first step. And it's a step that I have to return to all the time.
Oh, me too.
No matter how far you are, even when you do find that community.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's it. Right. That's 100% it. Vulnerability is the key. And
100%.
If you can unlock that within yourself, and if you can unlock that and express that externally, you will create an environment that is authentic.
Right.
Yeah. Because we're the keys to each other's authenticity.
Ooh.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I love that.
You know what I'm saying? Like that. I said that to the kids at the conference. Like, you are the keys to other people's authenticity. The more that I get to know you, right? And the more that I've gotten to know you, you know what I'm saying? Like, it allows us to navigate in a way that we can show up for who we really are. Right? We strip away all the bull jive and all the different things like that. You know what I mean? Or we start to inspect, well, what does this mean to you to be a black person? Right. It may look differently for me, right? Well, what similarities do we have, right? Well, what way do you like to communicate? What, like all the questions that are there, right? And we spend time with it, right? In fellowship, right? It's not the surface level stuff, but vulnerability is the key.
It is.
So, I just hope that y'all took something from today's episode, man. James Innocent, up and coming therapist, a true friend. You're gonna do such amazing things, bro. You already are, man.
Yeah,
like
you
this
already
is
are, but yeah.
man. Like this is it's an honor to be able to do this with you, man. Thanks for having me. With this project, and thanks for being on my podcast, man.
Oh, it's an honor. Really, it's a distinct honor. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you, man. And I just want to thank the DAS organization again. If y'all need resources, again, Marvin is a great resource. The DAS group is a great resource to unlock authenticity, right? If you need it, if your family needs it, for all the fathers that are struggling out there in the world, families that are struggling out there in the world. And just lean into love, people. That's the biggest thing, you know what I mean? Empathy is forged through intentional proximity. You have to be intentional, right?
Right.
To unlock authenticity, to give it to others, it's an intentional act. So thanks for tuning in. You can find us on Instagram at Race Relations Podcast, and you can find us on the website www.racerelationspodcast.com. You can also, if you need therapy, I am available to take clients in the state of Washington through my company, Co-Creative Therapy and Consultation LLC. You can look me up, www.cocreativetherapy.com. And signing off until the next one. Peace.